This is Warren Vanderhill with the Muncie Jewish Oral History Project. This evening I'm talking with Sam Dobrow at his home here in Muncie, Indiana, April 30, 1979. Sam, I'd like to begin by having you tell me as much as you can remember about your parents, where they were from in the old country, perhaps why they happened to leave the old country.
They're both from Russia. They left at a very early age, went to Indianapolis. The reason they left Russia was because of the pogroms and could better themselves in this country.
Was the pull to Indianapolis, because during our preliminary conversation you mentioned that when they came over, I assume they went to New York City, as most immigrants did, and then they came from New York City to Indianapolis?
Well, they really came direct to Indianapolis, no layover in New York City.
Well, they had to go to Ellis Island.
Well,
just to check in.
Yeah, that's...
So they came to Indianapolis. What was the reason they came to Indianapolis?
Had family there.
Okay. When your father and mother came here, about how old were they? Young children, adolescents, do you recall?
Your mother was a baby.
I don't really know too much. Rita knows more about my mother's life than I do.
She was a baby.
My father was a teenager, I think, very young teenager.
Mm-hmm. And what business did he get involved with when he came to Indianapolis, his first economic activity?
He took up a trade as a tailor and worked for a large tailoring concern in Indianapolis.
Had he been trained to be a tailor previous to coming to this country?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, the next and most obvious and important question then is, here is your father as part of the Indianapolis Jewish community. How does he happen to come to Muncie?
Because a relative had an interest in a business in Muncie and needed somebody to run it for him.
What was the business?
Scrap business.
Scrap business. Okay. So your father came to Muncie about what year, do you recall?
Early 20s, around 23, 22, 23.
Okay. And at that point then became involved in the
Scrap
business. As you look back on the years when you were in Muncie as a young person, what comments could you make about the Jewish community of your parents' generation? What was it like here in the 20s?
Well, I think it was a much closer knit community. However, I think it was a very cliquish type Jewish community. Cliques within cliques, I guess is probably the proper way to put it. But I think that the Jews in that generation revolved around their own Jewish community more than anything else. All their activities were within the Jewish community.
They didn't have a lot of contacts with, as far as social contacts with people outside the community?
I think on a very limited scale.
Well, when you speak of their social life then, which, as you said, revolved around members of the Jewish community, what sorts of things did they do socially?
Well, I think they had a club, a social club. I think it was called the Eureka Club, if I recall. Does that sound familiar to you?
I think someone's mentioned that.
Okay. And at the Eureka Club, like all things in those days, they had basically cards were the main things that drew them to the club part of it. The temple has always been a viable part of the existence in Muncie, to pay off the mortgage, do things for the temple. That always held, in those days particularly, held a great spot in everybody's social life. Of course, the Eureka Club was the days before the temple was built. Then afterwards, the temple took over the social area of the community.
Did your father play a very active role in the temple here in Muncie?
Yes.
I think he was an active member.
He was trustee.
In later years, I think, well, I know, in later years, his activity was appreciated because he helped financially a great deal with the temple.
How about your mother? Did she play an important role in the sisterhood, other organizations?
I think she had held an office in the sisterhood in Hadassah.
He was president of the Johnson.
So,
I got ahead of myself a little bit on that, so I'm going to have to backtrack and ask how your father met your mother. I should have gotten that in before, so we're a bit out of chronological order here.
you know, this is funny, Warren. Until Roots, which happened to just not very long ago, I was never really interested in the history of my family in particular or anything. I don't know.
They were both living in Indianapolis.
I guess they both lived in Indianapolis. I presume they both were going in the same social circles. I guess they went to the same, they must have belonged to the same synagogue. I'm assuming this, because I know of no other reason for them to meet. I really don't.
Well, you mentioned that you came here, you were born in Indianapolis, but then came to Muncie, and then you went back to Indianapolis. And did you go to all of your high school years at Shortridge High School?
All my high school years, yes.
Right, then following your graduation from high school, then what did you do?
Then I went to college,
Where did you go to college?
IU.
And then following your graduation from IU,
Then I came to Muncie.
then you came to Muncie, and that year was?
1938.
Okay, so here we are in the Depression. You've just graduated from Indiana University, and you decided then to come to Muncie where your father had this successful scrap business.
Well, let's say he had a scrap business.
Okay.
And being an only child, I felt an obligation to come to Muncie.
Okay. Now then, as someone who's just out of college working in Muncie, Indiana, I want to pick up the story as far as the Jewish community is concerned at that point. How then did you view this community as somebody who at this point is in his early 20s?
Well, I think it was a very viable community then because of the fact that everything was centered around the downtown area. They had a lot of Jewish-owned retail stores, and if the Jews didn't own them, they were Jewish managers. Days before television, the whole social life of the community was different.
What sorts of things did Jewish young people do as far as their social life at that time?
Young Jewish, or are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about your age now. College graduates, people of your age group who might not have been college graduates but were.
Did with anybody else of a 20 years old or 25, middle 20s would do. You went out socially like anybody else.
Okay, but was this primarily within the Jewish community?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. So at that time then, by the late 1930s, unlike, as you commented on your parents' generation, you began to have many more contacts. Certainly you would have had this at Shortridge at Indiana University with people who were non-Jews.
Not really, because in those days, for instance at IU, the dominant Gentile sororities would not permit dating of Gentile girls with Jewish fellows. And Indiana has an old history from way back about, let's say, anti-Semitism. And then, well, we were dealing with not urban people, but you're talking about more or less small community people in Indiana.
Many of whom would have had connections with the Klan in the 1920s.
They were, I don't know if they had connections, but at least they were open to it. They had probably been somewhere in their background.
And in most cases, they were not really familiar with Jews.
Correct. The warm in here, isn't me?
It's very warm in here.
Well, you're talking about the anti-Semitism at IU within the Greek system. Let me switch back to when you were in Muncie. The young Jewish people in Muncie then in the 1930s within the temple had social gatherings. Some people have mentioned to me that they used to get together with people in Marion and Anderson.
Yeah, there used to be a state organization that was very active at the time, and the youth groups from the various communities got together. But this was, I think this is something that wasn't really something steady. It was a very spasmodic type thing.
No.
I think we might have met twice a year or
Yeah.
something like that.
As you look back on your lifetime, how do you see the relationships between the Jews and the non-Jews in Muncie? Do you think there's been change?
First of all, the Jewish community has lost so many members. It's a very small community now, and I think that no question about it that living has changed completely for everybody with the advent of television, with the advent of golf courses, tennis courts, and mainly, even more so than that, the generation following my generation have come in contact with Gentiles who don't have the feeling, at least outwardly, of anti-Semitism. I know from my own children that they're part of the group. And people don't think in terms of he's a Jew, I'm not going to go with him. They think in terms of they're people and we like their company.
That's a change that you've seen in your lifetime, then.
Right.
Do you think that's because people have become more tolerant?
Well, people have become more tolerant. The world is going to be a smaller place for people to live in, and that's what they're realizing now. The world is a small place. I think the Holocaust brought a lot of this to light. And fortunately for us Jews, there are a lot of fine Gentiles who don't approve of the anti-Semitic leanings. They take people for what they are, not for what their religion is. And they realize that if I'm a Jew, that's my religion. That's not my government.
Yeah, right.
You can be a Methodist or you can be an Episcopalian or whatever you might be. That's your religion. And people realize that the same thing is true for Jewish religion. It's merely a religion. It's not a... well, as I told somebody the other day, we were talking about this Israeli thing. Just because I'm Jewish doesn't mean I approve of everything that is done for the Israelis or the Israelis do.
Yeah.
Because basically I'm an American first. This is where my country is America. My religion is Jewish. I think they're two separate things. You don't put church and state together, and that's the way I feel. And I think a great number of people feel this way.
As far as your lifetime is concerned, do you recall any specific incidents of anti-Semitism?
No, I really can't. I think one of the trouble with our people is the fact that if something doesn't go the way they want to, they like an easy excuse. And they can say this guy was anti-Semitic, that's why I didn't get the job, or do this or that. Excuse me. But I cannot think in my lifetime of anybody that caused any problem because of anti-Semitism.
As far as your dealings with people in the community. Was your family, as you would define this, and this is certainly open to a variety of definitions, a religious family?
Yes.
An observant family?
Yes. My parents were one of the few families in Muncie that had kept a kosher home. We were one of the very few businesses that closed on the holidays, our holy holidays. Today we're one of the only family that in Muncie that keeps a kosher home. we're still the only business that closes on the Jewish high holy days. No, I think that we come from an observant family. I think we are an observant family. And I think that this is the thing that why our children respect the religion, because they were given the religion in their home. They didn't wait for a Sunday school teacher or somebody else to teach them. I think they were taught in the home, and they respect the religion. They love it for that.
To this day, Friday night, the Sabbath dinner, the children are all here.
So in that sense, then, within your family, Judaism is really much more significant within the home than it is within the community on the outside.
Right. So I think that we feel the same way. We don't expect the public school system to educate our children in what's right and what's wrong and the social graces and all that. They're there to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic. In the same way we feel that religion should be done in the home. We'd have to depend on the 2 or 3 hours that they would go to a Sunday school or the few times they would go to the synagogue to teach them their religion, because they don't have the time or the wherewithal to teach everybody, particularly just our kids. It has to come from the home.
So you would say then that, as you perceive them, Jewish values have been of great importance, both in your upbringing and in the way you've brought up your children.
Yeah. And I think both Rita and I had a similar type of upbringing, and we want to bring our children up the same way.
Where did you meet your wife?
In the Army.
You were stationed out in Wyoming?
Right, Fort Warren.
Protecting us from pronghorn antelopes? When did you go into service?
1942.
You were in the Army?
Yeah.
And you happened to be stationed
Fort Warren.
out in Wyoming. And so you met, and when were you married?
43.
Shouldn't have asked
Didn't
that.
take long, did it?
1943. When were you discharged?
46.
And then came back to...
He went overseas.
Oh, you did go overseas. Where were you overseas?
European theater.
Okay. And then you pointed out we were discharged in 46.
46. We came back here.
How many children do you have?
3.
What are their names and ages?
Dorothy, Toby Malman,
35.
30 bucks. Yeah. But we're getting awful old. Edward Dobrow, 31, and Eileen.
2. His birthday was the 3rd of April.
Wow. And Eileen Davidson. How old is Eileen then?
28.
28.
20. Okay. 2 of them live in Muncie?
Yeah.
Okay. And Eileen?
Eileen Davidson lives in Chicago.
Okay.
She and her husband are practicing attorneys.
Oh. Impressive. How active have you been in the temple here in Muncie?
Very.
Health office, been on the board for many years.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty active in the temple. Now I let my children do it. They're the ones that are active.
Have there been any other?
Sounds like Everett.
Yeah, it is. Are there any other groups that you've been active in in the community?
Well, how do you do? How are you?
You want to get on tape here? Or you want to?
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. What other organizations outside of the Jewish community have you been active in here in Muncie?
Well, I was president of the East Central Heart Association. I was president of the Muncie Lions Club. I was president of Green Hills Country Club.
You're on the school councils when the kids were in school.
I was on the board of the Chamber of Commerce. That's about it.
And now you let your children do all the activities. Then.
Their time to move on.
Okay.
How was your meeting?
Not good.
Sam, could you tell me about some of the clubs that you have been active in Muncie? I've had a number of people I've interviewed tell me that many of the clubs for a fairly long period of time in Muncie's history were closed to Jews.
Well, We've had a good experience. I belong both the Elks Club and the Delaware Country Club. I was asked to join both of them. Actually asked to break the barriers down in both instances. And we were successful in doing it. I feel very fortunate.
This was what time? Do you recall how many years ago that was?
Mm-hmm.
The Elks about 20 years ago.
We belong in Delaware.
How long is it? 12 years? 11 or 12, I'm not sure.
Well, let's say a little more than a decade ago as far as Delaware is concerned, and a couple of decades as far as the Elks are concerned. But the last question I'd like to ask you, and one that I certainly would value your reflections on, and that is this. What do you think the future of the Jewish community is in Muncie, Indiana?
Can I brag?
Sure, yeah. This is the time for the vast panoramic view.
I think the future of the Jewish community in Muncie is good because, fortunately, our family is providing a lot of leadership. And with their background, I'm sure that there'll always be a Jewish community in Muncie. I do think that there'll be a smaller Jewish community because there's nothing really to bring Jews into a community the size of Muncie. The retail business has changed, where they don't have small stores anymore with retail managers. The youth, for most purposes, don't want to come back to a small town. We have been very fortunate that our two children are living here. But I think there'll always be a Jewish community, and I always think it'll be a viable one. The young people are interested in Jewish causes. They're all humanitarians, and they're having children, and they certainly want their children to have the best things possible, and they want to raise them as Jews. So it might be a lot limited, but I think that they'll always have a very vibrant Jewish community.
One final point. As you look at your generation, your parents' generation, and your children's generation, could you just cite a couple of things that you think have changed the most in this span of time, more than a half century, within this Jewish community?
Well, I think basically that the community is opening its arms to the newer generation much more readily, accepting them in any kind of position they want to attain. I don't get any doors closed to them anymore, which is very important because it's up to them as individuals to make their mark. And nothing closed, they can do what they want to do, go as far as they want to go.
Do you think this is true of the general society? That is to say, the larger society outside of communities like Muncie? I guess I'm asking you this on more of a national level, as you see this in your lifetime. Do you think there's more tolerance as far as the nation is concerned?
I think there is more tolerance in the small communities, Midwestern communities. From what I see in the eastern areas, I don't think that has changed, or if it has changed, it hasn't changed for the better particularly. I think that the West, I don't talk about the far West, but I'm talking about the West and the Midwest, and even the South. Jews have great opportunities there. The trouble with the Jewish communities in the larger areas, they seem to ghettoize themselves. And fortunately, in the smaller communities, we can't do that. And consequently, we can't ghettoize ourselves. We don't want to ghettoize ourselves. Why? The opportunities are better because I think our Gentile friends find that we don't have horns. I think they find that we are average people and also good American citizens. I'll take yourself, Warren. You live in the East. We know that individuals pop out, but I think it's the unusual there because of the fact that everything is well, they get beside themselves. They all live in one area. They all do one thing. They don't get out of their own sphere.
Yeah, it's very ethnocentric. There's no doubt on that. Well, I want to thank you for talking to me and taking part in this project. This has been Warren Vanderhill talking with Sam Dobrow at his home here in Muncie, Indiana, April 30, 1979.
Thank you, Warren.